Hello, my name's Harold Hafting, and welcome to Archaeological Minecraft. I'm a former archaeologist who enjoys playing Minecraft and thought it would be fun to combine the two. In today's episode, we'll be talking about Viking Ring Fortresses. The Viking Ring Fortress I'm replicating today in Minecraft is the fortress at Trelleborg on the island of Zealand in Denmark. It was commissioned by the Danish King Harald Bluetooth in 980 AD towards the end of his reign. And yes, I did say Harald Bluetooth, and yes, that is where the namesake for the wireless Bluetooth technology, perhaps used in the headphones you're listening to this right now, comes from. So let's quickly touch on that nickname before we continue. The nickname of Bluetooth seems to indicate he had a blue or black tooth, as in a tooth that had gone bad with rot, but it also could have been a corruption of the Anglo-Saxon term for a blue-black thane. A thane being the Anglo-Saxon position for someone who was granted land by the king, and blue-black could just be the color of his hair. Given that the first document that refers to him as Harald Bluetooth dates to 1140 AD, nearly 200 years after his death, it's really hard to determine which one might have been the origination of his nickname. Either way, it is true that the modern Bluetooth technology is named after him. Getting back to our topic at hand, the fortress at Trelleborg is one of 7 known examples of Viking Ring fortresses in Denmark and Sweden, with a possible 8th example identified on satellite imagery in a field by Helsingborg in Skåne, Sweden, and a potential 9th located in Riga in Østfold, Norway. The Viking Ring fortresses are called a couple of different names, the first of which is a Viking Ring castle. Another name is a Trelleborg-type fortress named after the structure at Trelleborg that I'm recreating here, and have been named as such due to Trelleborg being the first discovered example of this type of structure. And then lastly, it's called a Viking Ring fortress. It's that name which I'll be using in this video. I chose to name it that over the others as the term, quote, castle brings up visions to many of stone medieval fortifications, which are different than the structure we're constructing here. And since I'm replicating the structure here at Trelleborg, it seemed confusing if I was talking about other ring fortresses and we're calling them Trelleborg-type fortifications when they're not at Trelleborg. That said, even though those aren't the names I'm calling them in this video, they are absolutely valid names for this type of structure. Incidentally, there's a bit of a debate about where the name Trelleborg comes from. Some point to the etymology of Trelleborg meaning, quote, a fortress built by slaves, with borg meaning fortress and trella being a translation of thrall, which means slave, which is where the English word enthrall comes from. However, others point to trella being the plural of trell, meaning wooden staves or trees, perhaps making reference to the wooden posts and planks covering the inside and the outside of the ramparts. So it's quite possible that Trelleborg simply means wooden fortress. The Viking Ring fortress at Trelleborg was completely excavated from 1934 to 1942, and so archaeologists have quite a good understanding of the layout, dimensions, and various buildings of the structure that made up the overall fortress. That structure, like that of the other ring fortresses, has a circular rampart that's surrounded by a ditch. At the cardinal directions, there's an entrance through the rampart, which is lined with stone walls facing the entrance, with roads running from each entrance covered in wood, following those cardinal directions connecting the 4 entrances. The roads divided the circular ring fortress into 4 equal quarters, with the roads crossing each other at right angles. At Trelleborg, the rampart is 5 meters or 16 feet high and 17.5 or 57 feet wide, with an interior diameter of 136 meters or 446 feet. It was lined on its side and outside with oak posts, as was mentioned previously. The space between the two rows of oak posts separating the inside and outside of the rampart was filled with stones and loam. Loam is the name for a composition of soil made up predominantly of sand mixed with silt and clay. Typically, loam allows for better water drainage than clay and silt alone and has more structure than sand itself would provide. And so it is very likely that this type of soil was used with the stone filled within the rampart in a purposeful manner. Additionally, the two rows of oak posts were connected by reinforcing beams of wood connecting the inner and the outer walls together. As such, the whole of the rampart was made one contiguous and connected structure that was one large mass adding to its protection. On the outside of the rampart was a 5-meter or 16 feet wide berm that acted as a level area between the rampart wall and the outer ditch that may have contained an outer pathway. The excavation of the ring fortress at Trelleborg in Denmark shows that there was also a pathway around the inner side of the rampart, and that may have also been the case as well for the ring fortress at Trelleborg. The outer ditch was itself 17 meters or 56 feet wide and 4 meters or 13 feet deep, which had a pointed profile, like a V shape, at the bottom. This ditch was not filled with water, like a stereotypical moat, but it did allow for substantial amount of protection all the same. From the bottom of the ditch to the top of the rampart was 9 meters or 30 feet, which made scaling the rampart no easy feat, given that the ditches itself were a width of 17 meters. The site was also protected by being located between two rivers, which protected the site of the ring fortress, and these rivers were navigable by longships, which allowed them access to the sea, and was probably a major factor in why the Trelleborg ring fortress was placed where it was, as it allowed Harald Bluetooth to exert his authority and control access between the Baltic and the North Seas. While these Viking ring fortresses were not designed to withstand a long siege, because of where Trelleborg was located between two rivers and surrounded by boggy and swampy terrain, it would have been quite hard to bring a substantial armed force against it, and likely it was more designed to provide just enough protection to allow the inhabitants to hold out long enough until a larger army could travel and relieve the fortress and drive off the attacking army. Trelleborg does show that the site was under attack at some point, though it isn't clear if that event occurred after it was built or during its construction. However, it is clear that there was an attack at some point, as 19 arrowheads were found lodged and buried deep into the ramparts and gates. There were also a couple of mass graves found at the site, which I'll talk a little bit about later. But the individuals buried in those mass graves show many of them had deep cuts or wounds sustained from close quarters combat. It's also been theorized that Trelleborg was used as a training ground and or a barracks to house troops. Based on the structures and quantity of longhouses found at the site, it is estimated that the site could hold up to 1,300 inhabitants. That said, if you only count the longhouses within the rampart, that estimate could drop down to 800 inhabitants, in which case the longhouses that were located on the outside of the rampart would have probably or potentially been used for workshops, storage, or perhaps as stables. Either way, whether it could hold 800 or 1,300 inhabitants, that's a substantial armed force in the Viking Age. Speaking of the longhouses and the other structures on the site, if you recall from earlier in the video when I was discussing the inner divisions of the ring fortress, I mentioned that it was divided into 4 equal quarters, separated by roads that follow the cardinal directions. In each of these 4 quarters, there were 4 longhouses arranged into a square shape. Each longhouse was around 29.5 meters, or 97 feet long, and were rectangular in shape. However, the central part of the house bowed outwards in a rough ship-like shape, with the central portion of the longhouse being wider than the distance at the ends. Each of the four sides had an entrance, so one at each side and one at each end, and the whole of the structure was surrounded by an overhang that helped keep water away from the walls of the structure and snow from accumulating against the side of the structure. The interior of each longhouse was divided into 3 rooms, with a large central hall in the center that measured 18 by 8 meters, or 59 by 26 feet, and then a smaller room at each end, potentially used for storage or perhaps a mud room where people could then knock off the snow or cold or mud from their boots. In the reconstructions from the Trelleborg Museum, the longhouses are sided with wooden planks with posts surrounding the structure to hold up the porch, and the roofs were made from wooden shingles. As such, that's how I've modeled my reconstructions in this build. Besides the 16 longhouses, there were also 2 smaller houses on the inside of the ring fortress. One in the northeastern quarter and another small house in the southwestern quarter, as well as a small square structure by the north and the west gates. Perhaps that indicates that those were the gates that were used most and kept open most of the time, and so having a structure nearby where guards could monitor and watch the comings and goings perhaps made sense. Everything that I've discussed thus far with the shape and design of the ramparts, ditch, and gates, as well as the design and layout of the longhouses in each quarter, is also mirrored in the other ring fortresses that have had excavations. Those other sites are the ring fortresses at Trelleborg and at Freket, though the ring fortress at Trelleborg is the only one to be fully excavated. What seems to be unique to Trelleborg and not seen at the other ring fortresses is that on the exterior of the rampart and ditch there is a bailey, which is itself protected by its own rampart and ditch on the eastern side, which is the side that faces away from the ring fortress. This bailey contained 15 additional longhouses, arranged in a row, but with their ends oriented towards the center of the ring fortress. This has the effect of them appearing in a curve arranged around the ring fortress, with 2 longhouses on the one side with the other 13 in that curve. Each of those 15 longhouses was 26.3 meters long, or 86 feet long, making them slightly smaller than the longhouses within the interior of the structure, which you recall measured 29.5 meters long. As you can see from my reconstruction, I wasn't able to replicate the exact curve of the longhouses, and so I had to make some compromises, and so instead kept the longhouses around where they would have been had they been arranged in a curve, and just oriented them at right angles. Minecraft is a game of blocks after all, and so it's very difficult to make slight angles of 5 or 10 degree changes in a build. Beyond the bailey was a small cemetery containing 135 graves, primarily of young men. However, some of the graves contained the remains of women or children. Some of the graves contained no grave goods, with most of the remainder containing just a few artifacts, many of which show Christian influence. 2 graves of perhaps higher status or wealthier individuals contained quite a few items. One of the graves is of a woman who was found in a wooden casket with pearls, gaming stones, and a bronze bucket. The other grave with numerous grave goods was that of a man found with a silver-adorned axe and a bronze bowl. There were also a couple of mass graves found in the cemetery, as mentioned before, one of which was for 11 individuals and the other was for 5 individuals. strontium analysis was performed on the skeletal remains of the individuals found in the cemetery. Strontium analysis is used in an archaeological context to reconstruct past temperatures and climate shifts and to tell what made up an individual's diet as they were growing up. This is done by analyzing the material fractions and trace elements that made up the individual's teeth and bones. As a child's teeth develop, the trace elements that make up their diet are stored within the teeth's enamel, and so it can be used to tell where they grew up by looking at those trace elements within that enamel. In the case of these skeletal remains, the individuals found at the Trelleborg cemetery show that they mostly came from Norway and Poland, and as such, it's thought by archaeologists that they were foreign mercenaries that were stationed at the ring fortress as guards that could be relied upon to be loyal to Harald Bluetooth. So, why would Harald Bluetooth, King of Denmark, need or want loyal foreign mercenaries to be protecting his ring fortresses in Denmark? Harald Bluetooth was born to King Gorm the Old and became King of Denmark in 958 AD. He consolidated Danish rule over Jutland and the island of Zealand and introduced Christianity to Denmark. And recall that many of the graves in the cemetery at Trelleborg contained Christian artifacts. With his power over Denmark mostly consolidated, he started to flex his muscles over external foreign powers outside of Denmark. These included areas such as Normandy, parts of modern southern and western Sweden, and the northern coastal area along the Baltic Sea of modern Germany and Poland. You can see from the map the areas in red are those that he controlled directly, and those that are colored in yellow are the areas he exerted his political and military influence and was collecting tribute from. Incidentally, the black dots on the map are the 7 ring fortresses, with the white dot being Trelleborg, so you can get a reference of where those are at. I identified the 2 potential ring fortresses with the pink dots. Following the assassination of King Harald Greycloak in Norway, Harald Bluetooth made an effort to subjugate the Kingdom of Norway under his rule. He was for a time successful and became King of Norway in 970 AD, but due to a loss to the Germans at Danevirke in 974 AD, he lacked the troops and military to maintain authority in Norway and lost control there. His luck continued to turn, and he found himself fending off a rebellion by his son Svein Forkbeard. He died in either 985 or 986 AD and was succeeded by Svein Forkbeard, though some sources point to him being forcibly deposed from the Danish throne by his son before his death. Taking us back to the original question that led us to discuss the life of Harald Bluetooth, why would he need foreign mercenaries to protect his ring fortresses? If we look at the dates of when most of the ring fortresses were built, we see that the earliest one at Eggersborg was constructed between 975 and 980 AD. Feket was built in 980 AD, and Trelleborg was built in 980 to 981 AD. So if you look at the map and see where those are located compared to the areas of his kingdom and what he was attempting to hold as a sphere of influence, we can draw a good connection that Harald commissioned these fortresses toward the end of his reign when he lost control of Norway, was in conflict from forces in Germany, and when he was having to fend off a rebellion from his son Svein Forkbeard. It was useful to have these ring fortresses in the central location to protect troops and movement of those troops between the Baltic Sea and the North Sea. It appears he found it beneficial to use foreign mercenaries from lands he conquered in Norway and Poland who were loyal to him instead of using local Danish forces, which would have potentially been loyal to his son Svein Forkbeard. Well, I hope you found our Minecraft replica of Harald Bluetooth's Viking Ring Fortress at Trelleborg informative and interesting. If you enjoyed this video, please take the time to give it a like and a subscribe, and leave a comment about what you enjoyed or what I can improve in these videos. Thanks, have a good rest of your day, bye for now.